began in a time when the galaxy believed it had already seen every kind of war, every kind of species, and every possible future. Yet humanity from Earth was still new, still rising, and still misunderstood, and far away in the vast halls of the Galactic Council, leaders from powerful alien worlds gathered to discuss the growing presence of humans. Their voices calm but filled with concern, because reports kept arriving that human fleets were expanding faster than expected. Their warships, stronger than predicted, and their behavior impossible to fully understand. And among the human observers present in the council station were a few selected representatives, including a calm and sharp-minded commander named Jisoo and a strategist named Min-jae, who both stood quietly as alien leaders spoke about Earth as if it were already a problem to be solved, not a civilization to be understood. And as the meeting continued, holographic images filled the chamber, showing human fleets moving across nearby systems, building stations, mining resources, and testing unknown technologies. And one alien general stated clearly that humans had a pattern, that they always prepared for war even when they spoke of peace, and this made the council uneasy, while Jisoo remained still, his expression controlled, knowing that anything he said would not change their fear, and beside him Min-jae watched carefully, noticing how none of the council members asked what humans wanted, only what they might become. And back on Earth, far from the council's cold judgment, life continued but under quiet tension, as leaders and scientists worked together in hidden facilities, and among them were a brilliant engineer named Hannah and a systems commander named Taemin, who were both involved in projects so secret that even most governments did not fully understand them. And Hannah spent her days studying massive energy systems while Taemin oversaw deep space construction zones that were never shown to the public, and though they spoke little about it, both knew that humanity was preparing for something far beyond ordinary defense, because deep in space, far beyond the usual travel routes, something enormous was being built, something that did not look like a normal warship, something that moved slowly and silently as if it were waiting. And while this hidden work continued, the Galactic Council finally reached its decision, believing that waiting longer would only make humans stronger. And so, they agreed to act first, to launch a united strike that would force Earth into submission before it could become a real threat, and orders were sent across the galaxy, calling fleets from many worlds, assembling thousands of warships into one massive force, the largest ever created under the Council's command. And as this fleet gathered, its commanders felt confident, even relaxed, because they believed no single planet could stand against such power. And when the final formation was complete, the fleet moved toward Earth, its size so vast that it darkened the space around it, like a moving wall of metal and fire. And as it entered the outer edges of the solar system, human detection systems immediately picked it up, sending alerts across Earth. And in a command center deep below the surface, Jisoo stood again, now back on his home world, watching the incoming fleet with calm focus, while Min-jae stood beside him, analyzing data and predicting enemy movements. And around them, officers prepared defenses, fleets were mobilized, and weapon systems were brought online. Yet something felt different, because there was no panic, no shouting, only a quiet sense of readiness. And when the Galactic Council finally opened communication, their message was simple and direct, demanding Earth's surrender and warning of total destruction if humans resisted. And for a moment the world waited, wondering how humanity would respond. And Jisoo gave the order to send a reply, not with fear, but with clarity, stating that Earth would not surrender, and that the Council should turn back while it still had the chance. And when the alien leaders heard this, many of them laughed, believing humans were either foolish or desperate, and so without further discussion, they gave the command to prepare for attack. But what they did not know was that humanity had already made its choice long before this moment, because years ago, when the first signs of galactic tension appeared, secret plans had begun, plans that only a few like Hannah and Taemin fully understood. And as the Council fleet moved closer, readying its weapons, Taemin stood in a hidden command station far from Earth, looking at a massive display that showed something slowly coming to life, something so large it could not be seen all at once. And Hannah stood beside him, her hands steady as she activated final systems, her voice calm as she confirmed that the structure was stable, that the energy core was ready, and that all systems were responding. And though neither of them said it directly, both knew that what they were about to awaken was not just a weapon, but the result of humanity's deepest fears and greatest determination. And back near Earth, the first wave of alien warships moved into attack position, their weapons glowing as they charged, ready to strike a planet they believed could not fight back. While Jisoo watched the incoming signals, his expression unchanged, and Min-jae quietly asked if it was time, and after a brief silence, Jisoo nodded once, giving a single command that would change everything, and far out in the darkness of space, beyond the sight of the approaching fleet, something began to move, something vast and silent, something that carried with it the weight of an entire species' will to survive, and as its systems fully activated, its surface lit up with lines of energy, like a sleeping giant opening its eyes for the first time, and though the galaxy fleet had come prepared for war, they had no idea that they were about to face something far beyond anything they had ever imagined, because humanity had not been waiting in fear, but in patience, and now that patience was ending. Continued as the silence between Earth and the approaching galaxy fleet grew heavier, not with fear but with purpose, and while alien commanders prepared their warships for a decisive strike, humanity moved with quiet precision behind the scenes, far away from the front lines where Jisoo and Min-jae stood watching the enemy advance. Deep in hidden space where no outsider had ever reached, Taemin and Hannah worked inside a massive command chamber that was built within something so large it felt like standing inside a moving world, and this was the truth that the galaxy had failed to see, that humanity had not been building just fleets or defenses, but something far greater, something that could change the balance of power forever. And as the systems around them came alive with soft vibrations and glowing lights, Hannah checked the final readings with steady hands while Taemin looked out across a wide observation panel that showed only darkness, though he knew that beyond that darkness stretched the outer structure of the final human weapon, a construct so vast that even its full shape could not be seen at once. And years ago when the first designs were made, many had doubted it was possible, saying that no species could build something on such a scale, but humans had continued anyway, driven not by pride but by the simple understanding that one day the galaxy might stand against them, and they needed a way to survive, and now that day had come, and as Taemin gave the order to begin full activation, deep within the core of the structure, energy started to gather, drawn from hidden sources and stored over decades, forming a power level that no normal warship could ever reach, and Hannah spoke quietly as she confirmed that the energy flow was stable, though even she could feel the weight of what they were about to unleash, because this weapon was not designed for small battles, it was made for total war. And back near Earth, the first shots were fired as the galaxy fleet launched a testing strike, beams of light crossing space and hitting the outer defenses of human positions, and though the damage was limited, it sent a clear message that the Council was done waiting, and in response, human fleets moved forward, smaller in number but organized with sharp precision, their warships forming defensive lines as Jisoo directed them with calm focus, while Min-jae continued to analyze enemy patterns, quickly realizing that the galaxy fleet was far larger than expected, with layers of ships prepared for long-term combat, and even with all of humanity's strength, the outcome of a direct fight would not be certain. And yet Jisoo showed no sign of doubt, because he knew something the enemy did not, and as the battle slowly began to grow, the alien commanders noticed something strange, that Earth was not using its full power, that its fleets were holding back, as if they were waiting for something, and this confused the Council leaders, who began to suspect that humans might have a hidden plan. But before they could act on that thought, a new signal appeared on their sensors, something so large and distant that at first it was mistaken for a natural object, perhaps a drifting body or a massive station. But as the signal grew stronger, it became clear that it was moving and moving with intention, and back in the hidden command center, Taemin watched the same signal appear on his own display, his voice steady as he confirmed that the final human weapon had begun its approach, and Hannah closed her eyes for a brief moment before opening them again, knowing that once it entered the battlefield, there would be no turning back, and as the massive structure moved closer, its systems continued to activate, layer after layer coming online, shields forming across its surface, weapons charging deep within its core, and control systems linking with human command networks, allowing Jisoo to receive direct updates even from across the distance. And when Min-jae saw the incoming data, he finally allowed himself a small breath of relief, because the timing was perfect, and as the galaxy fleet prepared for a second, larger attack, their sensors began to struggle, overwhelmed by the growing presence of the approaching object, and some commanders started to question what they were seeing, because nothing in their records matched its scale, and as tension spread among the alien ranks, the Council leaders demanded answers, but there were none. That made sense, and then, slowly, the edge of the final human weapon came into visual range, not all at once but piece by piece, a vast surface of metal and energy stretching across space like a second world. And the battlefield changed in that moment because even before a single shot was fired, the sheer size of the structure began to affect the minds of those who saw it, and for the first time since the fleet had left its home systems, doubt began to grow, and back on Earth people watched the distant battle through live feeds, many of them silent as they saw what their species had created. A weapon so large it no longer felt like a machine but something closer to a force of nature, and yet within it, humans like Hannah and Tamine remained focused, guiding its systems, ensuring that every part of it functioned as intended, and as the final human weapon moved into position behind Earth, casting a shadow that stretched across the battlefield, Jisoo gave the order for all human fleets to fall back, not in retreat, but in preparation, and Min-jae transmitted the final command codes that linked the weapon fully to human control. And as this happened, the Galaxy fleet finally understood that this was not just a hidden project or a new type of warship, but something entirely different, something they had not prepared for, and as their attack formations began to break under uncertainty, the Council leaders realized too late that their decision to strike Earth had triggered something far beyond their control because humanity had not responded with fear or weakness, but with a plan that had been waiting in silence for years, and now that plan was about to unfold, and as the final human weapon completed its approach, its systems fully awakened, it stood ready above the battlefield, not just as a defense, but as the beginning of an answer the Galaxy would never forget. Unfolded as the battlefield reached a point where no one could pretend this was a normal war anymore, because the moment the final human weapon settled into position behind Earth, everything changed in a way the Galaxy fleet had never experienced before, and from his command station, Jisoo stood calm but focused, watching as the massive structure aligned itself with perfect precision, while beside him Min-jae tracked every movement of the enemy, noticing how their once tight formations were now breaking apart slightly, not from damage but from uncertainty, and far inside the core of the planet-sized weapon, Hannah and Tamine worked together without pause, their voices steady as they checked each system, confirming that the shields were fully active and the primary weapons were charging at a controlled rate, and even though they had trained for this moment for years, there was still a quiet weight in their minds, because they knew that once they gave the command to fire, there would be no way to undo what followed, and out in the open space before them, the Galaxy fleet hesitated for only a short time before its commanders forced themselves to act, because retreating without a fight was not something the Council could accept, and so orders were sent across thousands of warships to begin a full-scale attack, and in response, the darkness of space lit up as countless beams, missiles, and energy waves were launched toward Earth and the massive structure behind it, filling the void with light and motion, and for a brief moment it looked like a storm had been unleashed, powerful enough to destroy entire systems. And yet when the attack reached the final human weapon, something unexpected happened, because instead of breaking or even slowing, the weapon's outer shield absorbed everything, waves of energy spreading across its surface like ripples on water, fading away without leaving a mark, and this single moment sent a shock through the Galaxy fleet, because never before had such a massive combined attack failed so completely, and on their command decks, alien leaders stared in disbelief, some demanding more power, others questioning their sensors, but none of them could deny what they were seeing, and as the attack continued, growing stronger and more desperate, the result remained the same: complete absorption, complete resistance, as if the weapon itself was not just defending but quietly studying the force being used against it. And back inside the weapon, Hannah confirmed that the energy levels were rising beyond expectations, because the shield was not only blocking the attacks but also converting part of that energy into usable power, feeding it back into the system, and when Tamine heard this, he gave a small nod, knowing that this was exactly how the weapon had been designed, to turn the enemy's strength into its own advantage, and as the Galaxy fleet pushed harder, trying to overwhelm the defenses, Jisoo finally gave the order that had been waiting since the beginning, a simple command that carried the weight of everything humanity had prepared for, and as Min-jae transmitted the signal, the final human weapon shifted slightly, its massive structure adjusting its angle as deep within its core. A single primary system reached full charge, and for a brief moment, there was silence, not in sound but in motion, as if the entire battlefield paused without knowing why, and then the weapon fired, not with a scattered barrage or multiple shots, but with one focused beam of energy so vast and powerful that it cut across space in a straight line, striking the center of the Galaxy fleet, and in an instant entire sections of warships disappeared, not damaged or broken but completely erased, leaving behind empty space where thousands of vessels had once been, and the shock of the single attack spread faster than any signal, reaching every corner of the fleet as commanders struggled to understand what had just happened. And panic began to replace confidence, because this was no longer a battle they could win through numbers or coordination. And despite this, some leaders still refused to accept defeat, ordering another wave of attacks. But now their movements lacked the unity they had before, and their strikes became less effective as fear took hold, and from his position, Jisoo watched everything without emotion, not out of coldness but because he understood that this outcome had been decided long ago. The moment the council chose war over understanding, and Min-jae quietly updated him on the enemy's condition, reporting heavy losses and declining coordination, while suggesting that the next strike could end the battle entirely. And inside the weapon, Hannah hesitated for a brief second when she saw the destruction caused by the first shot, but Taemin placed a steady hand on the console and reminded her that this was the only way to protect Earth. And with that, she continued her work, preparing the system for another firing cycle, and as the Galaxy fleet attempted to reorganize, some ships began to turn away, trying to retreat. But their movements were slow and disordered, and before they could escape, the final human weapon adjusted once more, its energy building again, brighter and stronger than before, and when it fired the second time, the result was even more devastating, as another massive portion of the fleet vanished in a single moment, leaving the remaining ships scattered and broken. And now there was no denial left, no belief that victory was possible, only the clear understanding that they were facing something beyond their control. And across the fleet, emergency signals were sent, calls for retreat, for surrender, for anything that might stop the destruction. And for the first time since the war began, the Galactic Council leaders felt true fear, not just for their fleets but for their own place in the galaxy, because they had challenged a species that had prepared not just to fight, but to survive at any cost. And as the battlefield fell into chaos, the final human weapon remained steady, silent except for the low hum of its systems, waiting for the next command, while Jisoo and Min-jae stood together, knowing that the war had already turned, and that what came next would decide not just the fate of the fleet before them, but the future of how the galaxy would see humanity forever. Continued as the battlefield, once filled with confident formations of the Galaxy fleet, now drifted in broken silence, scattered ships trying to regroup while the shadow of the final human weapon remained above them like an unmovable sky. And from his command center, Jisoo watched the situation with steady eyes, while Min-jae tracked every remaining enemy signal, noting how their movements had changed from organized strategy to desperate survival. And far within the massive weapon, Hannah and Taemin stood surrounded by glowing panels and flowing data, both of them aware that the war had reached its turning point, because the enemy was no longer attacking with strength but reacting with fear. And yet the danger was not completely over, as some of the most powerful warships in the Galaxy fleet, those built for extreme combat, began to gather into a final defensive line, their commanders choosing to fight rather than surrender, believing that if they could destroy even a part of the human weapon, they might still have a chance to escape. And as these ships aligned themselves, they charged their strongest weapons, systems that had been held back until now, weapons capable of tearing apart planets, and when they fired, the space around them shook with energy, massive beams and waves crashing toward the final human weapon in one last united strike. And for a moment, even Jisoo remained silent as he watched the attack unfold, knowing this would be the enemy's final attempt. And when the attack hit, the surface of the weapon lit up brighter than before, energy spreading across its shields in powerful waves. But once again, the result did not change. The shield held firm, absorbing and dispersing the force without breaking, and inside, Hannah reported that shield capacity remained stable, though the incoming energy was higher than anything they had recorded before, and Taemin quickly adjusted the systems, redirecting the absorbed power back into the core, increasing the weapon's output even further. And as this happened, the remaining Galaxy ships realized the truth they had been avoiding, that no matter how much power they used, they could not damage what stood before them, and that realization spread like a quiet storm, breaking the last of their resolve. And across their communication channels, voices began to change, from commands to questions, from orders to fear, and some ships started to shut down their weapons, while others attempted to flee in different directions, hoping to escape the range of the human weapon. But Min-jae quickly noticed this shift and informed Jisoo that the fleet was collapsing, not from destruction alone but from the loss of unity. And with calm certainty, Jisoo gave the next command, one that would end the battle completely, and far inside the weapon, Hannah took a slow breath as she prepared the system for a full field action, something they had only tested in simulations, while Tameen confirmed all safety limits were removed, allowing the weapon to operate at maximum capacity. And as the systems aligned, the entire structure seemed to come alive in a new way, its surface glowing with lines of energy that spread outward like a network. And then, instead of firing a single beam, the final human weapon released a wide energy wave, expanding outward in all directions, moving across the battlefield with unstoppable force, and wherever it passed, the remaining warships lost power instantly, their systems shutting down as if they had been turned off, engines stopping, weapons going silent, shields collapsing without resistance, and within moments, the entire galaxy fleet was left drifting, no longer an attacking force but a field of powerless vessels. And the sudden silence that followed was deeper than any before, because now there was no fight left, no movement, only the quiet proof that the battle had ended, and from their positions, the alien commanders could only watch as their ships became nothing more than empty shells in space. And back on Earth, people saw the same images, the once terrifying fleet now completely still, and for many, it was hard to understand that the war had been decided so quickly once the true weapon was revealed. And inside the command center, Jisoo lowered his gaze slightly, not in relief but in thought, because even though they had won, he knew the cost of what they had shown the galaxy, and Min-jae quietly asked what the next step would be, and after a short pause, Jisoo ordered all human fleets to hold position and not fire again, making it clear that the destruction would stop here, and this command was sent across all systems, reaching even Hannah and Tameen, who both paused as they heard it, understanding that humanity had chosen not to finish the enemy completely. And as the final human weapon remained active, its system stable and ready, it did not fire again, instead holding the entire battlefield under its control. And slowly signals began to come from the disabled galaxy ships, not attacks but messages, requests for communication, for negotiation, for survival, and among them was a direct signal from the Galactic Council itself, asking for a ceasefire and offering surrender. And when Min-jae received it, he looked to Jisoo, who nodded once, allowing the communication to open, and for the first time since the battle began, the council leaders spoke not with authority but with caution, their voices carrying the weight of defeat as they acknowledged humanity's power and asked for an end to the conflict. And as this conversation unfolded, the final human weapon remained above them all, silent and unmoving, a constant reminder of what had just happened. And far within it, Hannah looked at the energy readings slowly stabilizing, while Tameen leaned back slightly, knowing that the system had performed beyond expectations, but also knowing that its existence would change everything going forward. And across the battlefield, the remaining ships waited, powerless and uncertain, as humanity decided their fate. And in that moment, it became clear to everyone, human and alien alike, that this war was never going to be decided by numbers or alliances, but by the simple fact that humanity had prepared for the worst in silence. And when that moment came, they had answered with something the galaxy could not defeat. And now, as the broken fleet drifted under the watch of a planet-sized weapon, the balance of power had shifted completely, leaving only one question remaining, not about who would win, but about what humanity would choose to do next. Reached its final stage as the battlefield remained quiet, filled with powerless ships of the galaxy fleet drifting under the shadow of the final human weapon. And from his command center, Jisoo stood still, looking at the countless signals now marked as inactive, while Min-jae carefully monitored every communication channel, ensuring that no hidden threat remained. And far inside the massive structure, Hannah and Tameen watched as the weapon systems slowly reduced their output, stabilizing. After the immense release of power, and although everything was under control, there was a deep understanding among all of them that what had just happened would echo across the galaxy for generations. And as the Galactic Council opened a full communication link, their leaders appeared on the main display, no longer proud or commanding, but careful and measured, their voices carrying a tone that had never been heard before, and they spoke directly to Jisoo, acknowledging their defeat and asking for terms, not as rulers but as survivors. And for a moment, there was silence on the human side, not because they did not know what to say, but because the weight of the decision was greater than any battle. And Min-jae looked at Jisoo, waiting, while messages from Earth's leaders arrived urging caution, reminding them that this was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. and Jisoo finally stepped forward, his voice calm and clear as he spoke not just to the council but to every ship listening, stating that Earth had never wanted war, that humanity had only prepared because it understood the fear of being alone in a galaxy full of stronger powers, and that the attack on Earth had forced them to respond. And as he spoke, Hannah and Taemin listened from within the weapon, both feeling a quiet sense of relief that the fighting had stopped, and across the disabled fleet, alien commanders listened carefully, knowing their survival depended on what came next. And Jisoo continued, saying that humanity could destroy what remained of the fleet at any moment. But it would not, because survival did not have to mean extinction for others, and this statement moved through the communication lines like a wave, surprising many who had expected revenge, and the council leaders exchanged looks before responding, agreeing to accept any conditions that would allow their fleets to leave, and Min-jae quickly brought up the proposed terms that had been prepared in advance, showing that humanity had not only planned for war, but also for peace, and these terms were simple but firm, that the galaxy would recognize Earth as a sovereign and equal power, that no species would attempt to attack or control human space again, and that a new system of communication and cooperation would be created, not ruled by fear, but by mutual understanding. And as these terms were presented, the council leaders showed no resistance, because they knew they had no position left to argue from, and after a brief discussion among themselves, they agreed, formally accepting every condition. And in that moment the war officially ended, not with the destruction of one side, but with the complete shift of power. And as Min-jae confirmed the agreement, he looked at Jisoo with a small nod, while back on Earth, people watched as the news spread, many feeling pride, others feeling quiet shock at how close they had come to losing everything. And inside the final human weapon, Hannah began the process of lowering the shields and preparing to release control over the battlefield, while Taemin oversaw the safe shutdown of the main weapon systems, ensuring that no accidental discharge could occur. And as the systems powered down, the massive structure remained in place, still active but no longer threatening, a silent guardian above Earth. And across the battlefield, the disabled galaxy ships slowly began to regain limited power, just enough to move as humanity allowed them to leave. And one by one, the warships turned away, their movements slow and careful, as if afraid that any sudden action might trigger another response. And as they retreated, many of their commanders looked back at the final human weapon, understanding that they had witnessed something that would change their entire view of humanity. And as the last of the fleet began to exit the system, the Galactic Council sent one final message, not of authority, but of acknowledgement, recognizing humanity, not as a threat, but as a force that had earned its place. And Jisoo accepted the message without pride, simply confirming the end of hostilities. And as the communication closed, the command center grew quiet, the tension finally easing after everything that had happened, and Min-jae let out a slow breath, while Jisoo remained thoughtful, knowing that this was not just the end of a war, but the beginning of a new role for humanity. And far inside the weapon, Hannah and Taemin stood together for a moment, looking at the comm systems around them, both aware that they had helped create something that should never be used lightly again. And as the final human weapon entered a stable orbit above Earth, it became more than just a tool of war. It became a symbol, a clear and permanent message to the galaxy that humanity would defend itself when pushed, but would not destroy without reason. And over time, that message spread far beyond the systems that had witnessed the battle, reaching distant worlds and future generations, shaping how others would see Earth and its people. And in the quiet that followed, Jisoo looked out toward space, knowing that the galaxy would remember this day not because of fear alone, but because of the choice humanity had made when it held absolute power, and that choice, more than any weapon, was what truly defined them.